The story you're about to watch. Barron Trump helps a homeless veteran. What he does next changes lives, begins with an act of kindness that transforms not just one life, but an entire community. How did a single encounter spark a movement that would challenge critics, inspire thousands, and leave a lasting legacy? Watch till the end to see how this remarkable journey unfolds. Don't forget to subscribe and share where you're watching from in the comments. Barron Trump adjusted the baseball cap lower over his eyes as he strolled down the bustling streets of Washington, D.C. It wasn't easy being recognized wherever he went, even years after his father had left the presidency. This was his escape, a rare chance to feel normal in a world that often felt like it was watching his every move. He stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets, letting the rhythm of the city guide him. He turned a corner near Lafayette Park and paused. Amid the chatter of tourists and the hum of traffic, a figure caught his eye. Sitting slumped against the cold stone wall of a building was a man holding a cardboard sign. The words written in shaky, uneven letters read "Veteran. Hungry. Anything helps?" Barron slowed his pace, his eyes scanning the scene. The man couldn't have been more than 40, but his hollow cheeks and scruffy, graying beard made him look older. His military jacket was threadbare, and his boots were caked in dirt. A small tin cup sat at his side, jingling faintly as a passerby dropped in some change. Barron noticed most people didn't even look at him. They walked by as if he were invisible. He felt a tug of discomfort. Growing up in opulence had given him little exposure to the struggles of ordinary people, but something about this man's silent dignity struck a chord. Barron hesitated, his feet rooted to the ground as he considered what to do. The man glanced up, his tired eyes meeting Barron's. "Afternoon, kid," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "Don't worry, I'm not going to bother you." Barron shook his head, stepping closer. I don't mind," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "Are you okay? Do you need something?" The man chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "Kid, if I started listing everything I need, we'd be here all day." The response made Barron's chest tighten. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching down to meet the man's gaze. "Name's Henry." "Henry Walsh," the man replied, extending a calloused hand. Barron shook it without hesitation. Henry tilted his head. "You're not like most people who walk by," he observed. "Most just toss a coin or pretend I'm not here." Barron shrugged, unsure how to respond. "I guess. I wanted to help, but I don't know how." Henry leaned back, studying the boy before him. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? Knowing how." Barron's mind raced. He'd spent his life in a world of luxury, surrounded by resources most people couldn't dream of. Yet here he was, face to face with someone who needed more than a quick fix. He pulled out his wallet, scanning its contents. A crisp $100 bill stared back at him. He hesitated. "It's not just about the money," Kid Henry said, as if reading his thoughts. "Sometimes what people like me need most is to be seen." The words stayed with Barron as he handed over the bill, but as he walked away, his mind churned. Money wasn't enough, not for someone like Henry, not for the others he had seen scattered around the city. There had to be something more he could do. He stopped in his tracks. Slowly, an idea began to take shape in his mind. Barron glanced over his shoulder at Henry, who was already tucking the bill into his jacket. A sense of determination washed over him. He didn't know how yet, but he was going to make sure this meeting wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Barron Trump sat in his room that evening, the encounter with Henry replaying in his mind. His laptop glowed in the dim light as he scrolled through articles on homelessness and veterans' struggles. The numbers startled him. Tens of thousands of veterans were homeless across the country, many battling PTSD, addiction, or the trauma of being forgotten. The more he read, the angrier he felt. How could men and women who had served their country be left to fend for themselves? And yet, he also felt overwhelmed. He was just a teenager. What could he do? Barron's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from his mother. "Dinner in 20. Don't be late." He sighed, closing his laptop. But as he descended the grand staircase to the dining room, an idea began to form. At dinner, he found himself surrounded by the usual luxury crystal glasses, silver cutlery, and perfectly arranged dishes prepared by their chef. His mother, Melania, sipped her tea gracefully, glancing at him with a raised brow. "You're quiet tonight, Barron," she said. "Everything okay?" He hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject. His father wasn't there, he was away at a speaking engagement, so it was just the two of them. That gave him a little more courage. "I met someone today," he began, setting his fork down. "A veteran. Homeless. His name's Henry." Melania's expression softened, though there was a hint of concern. "That's kind of you to stop and talk. Did you help him?" "I gave him some money, but it didn't feel like enough," Barron admitted. "There are so many people like him. It feels wrong, like we should be doing more." Melania's lips pressed into a thoughtful line. "It is a complicated problem," she said carefully. "People try to help, but there are no easy solutions." "But what if we did something big?" Barron pressed, his voice rising with enthusiasm. "Like, what if we used the Trump name to actually make a difference? We have so much influence, people would listen." Melania's brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't dismiss the idea. "What are you thinking?" "I want to help Henry. Not just with money, but with a plan, a job, maybe even housing," Barron said, his words spilling out quickly now. "And then I want to help others like him. Maybe start a program for veterans who are homeless. We could bring attention to the issue, get businesses involved, raise funds." His mother studied him for a long moment. "That's a very ambitious idea," she said finally. "But it's also a good one. If you're serious, we could talk to your father when he gets back." Barron nodded eagerly. "I am serious." The next day, Melania surprised him by setting up a meeting with someone who could help their family's longtime advisor, Mr. Cohen. He was a seasoned strategist and philanthropist, with connections that spanned across political and corporate circles. Barron Mr. Cohen greeted him warmly, shaking his hand. "Your mother tells me you have a big idea." Barron explained his plan, trying to keep his nerves in check as Cohen listened intently, nodding along. When he finished, Cohen leaned back in his chair. "It's a worthy cause," he said, "and it's clear you're passionate about it. But we'll need to be strategic. Helping one man is a start, but scaling it to help many will require resources, partnerships, and public buy-in." "I'll do whatever it takes," Barron said, his resolve firm. "Well then," Cohen said with a small smile, "let's start by helping your friend Henry." The next day, Barron and Cohen returned to Lafayette Park. It didn't take long to find Henry sitting in the same spot as before. His eyes widened in surprise as Barron approached, this time accompanied by the older man in a sharp suit. "You again," Henry said, chuckling. "Didn't think I'd see you twice." Barron smiled. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said about needing more than money. So I came back because I want to help, really help." Henry looked skeptical but intrigued. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Barron replied. "But I might need your help too. If we can get you back on your feet, maybe we can figure out a way to help others like you." Henry's gaze softened, a flicker of hope breaking through his guarded expression. "Kid, you've got yourself a deal." Henry Walsh sat across from Barron Trump in a small, quiet cafe just off Pennsylvania Avenue. It was the kind of place where you could sit unnoticed, and for Henry, that was a blessing. For Barron, however, it was a rare opportunity to be out in public without the weight of constant scrutiny. "So, you're telling me you've got some big shot helping you out with this get Henry back on his feet plan?" Henry asked, stirring his coffee with a slightly shaky hand. His tone was skeptical, but there was a glimmer of cautious optimism in his eyes. Barron nodded. "Mr. Cohen's already made a few calls. He knows a guy who runs a construction company. They're looking for experienced workers. I thought maybe we could start there." Henry's lips curved into a faint smile. "Construction, huh? I've done my fair share of that after my service. Good, honest work." "And housing," Barron added quickly. "We're working on securing temporary housing for you, somewhere safe where you can get back on your feet without worrying about where you'll sleep every night." Henry's smile faded slightly, and he looked down at his cup. "It's been a long time since I felt like I had a shot, kid," he said quietly. "You sure this isn't just some charity stunt? Something to make you feel better about yourself?" Barron's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward. "It's not a stunt," he said firmly. This isn't about me, it's about you. And people like you. I want to do something real. Henry studied the boy for a long moment before nodding slowly. All right, kid, I'm in. 2 weeks later, Henry stepped into his first day on the job at a bustling construction site in Northern Virginia. Barron had insisted on being there, watching from a distance as Henry was greeted by the foreman, a gruff but kind man named Rick. You served? Rick asked, shaking Henry's hand. Marine Corps, Henry replied. Afghanistan, 2 tours. Rick nodded, his grip firm. Good. We could use a man with your discipline. Let's get you started. As Henry was led away, Barron couldn't help but smile. Seeing Henry in a hard hat and work gloves, ready to reclaim his dignity, filled him with a deep sense of satisfaction. But he knew this was just the beginning. That evening, Barron sat in a small meeting room at the Trump Organization's D.C. office. Around the table were Mr. Cohen, a representative from the local Department of Veterans Affairs, and a few executives from corporations that Cohen had convinced to hear them out. Barron took a deep breath, glancing at the notes he'd prepared. He had rehearsed his pitch a dozen times in front of a mirror, but now, under the gaze of experienced professionals, the pressure felt real. Thank you for being here, Barron began, his voice steady. I'm here because I believe we can do more to help veterans like Henry Walsh. He served his country, and like so many others, he came home to find that the country wasn't ready to serve him in return. He paused, meeting each person's gaze. I want to start a program that connects veterans experiencing homelessness with opportunities for stable jobs and housing. We can partner with construction companies, restaurants, and other businesses to create a network of support. And with your help, we can scale this idea far beyond D.C. One of the executives, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, folded her hands on the table. This is an ambitious proposal, she said. Why do you think it will work? Barron swallowed hard but held his ground. Because it's not just about charity, he replied. It's about dignity. People like Henry don't want handouts, they want a chance to rebuild their lives. And we have the resources to make that happen. The room was silent for a moment before Cohen spoke. What Barron is proposing aligns with many of your CSR goals, and if we're successful, this could set a new standard for how businesses engage with veterans. The executives exchanged looks, and one by one, they began to nod. Agreements were drafted and commitments made. A fund would be established, and businesses would pledge jobs and training programs for veterans. 3 days later, Barron visited Henry in his new temporary housing, a modest apartment provided through one of the program's first partnerships. The space was small but clean, with a bed, a kitchenette, and a small table. Henry greeted him at the door with a wide grin. You didn't have to come all the way out here, Kid Henry said, stepping aside to let Barron in. I wanted to see how you're doing, Barron replied, looking around. It's nice. Yeah, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. First place I've had to myself in years. It feels good. Barron smiled. This is just the start, Henry. We've got a lot more to do. Henry chuckled. You've got a big heart, kid. Don't let this world make it small. 2 months had passed since Henry Walsh's life had taken a sharp turn for the better. Barron Trump, now immersed in his project, watched with awe as their small initiative began to grow. What started as a simple idea to help one man had evolved into a fledgling program called Operation Homeward, dedicated to connecting homeless veterans with stable jobs, housing, and emotional support. Barron stood in the bustling conference room of a community center, where Operation Homeward was hosting its first open event. The atmosphere buzzed with energy as veterans from across D.C. trickled in, mingling with company representatives, counselors, and volunteers. Tables were set up with job applications, housing resources, and even mental health support services. A banner hung above the entrance, proudly displaying the program's tagline, Restoring Dignity, One Life at a Time. Henry, now a pivotal member of the program, walked into the room wearing a clean button-up shirt and jeans. He immediately caught Barron's eye and approached him with a firm handshake. This is quite the operation you've put together, Henry said. Glancing around the room, his tone was light, but there was unmistakable pride in his voice. Barron shrugged modestly. We're just getting started. Henry chuckled. Don't sell yourself short, kid. You're making waves. Their conversation was interrupted by a woman's voice. Excuse me, are you the young man running this program? Barron turned to see a middle-aged woman standing nearby, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of a tall, wiry man who looked to be in his late 30s. His eyes were sunken, and his clothes hung loosely on his frame, but there was a spark of hope in his expression. This is my brother, Stephen, the woman explained. He's a Marine Corps veteran. We've been trying to get him help for years, but, well, it hasn't been easy. I heard about your program and thought this might be a fresh start for him. Barron nodded, extending his hand to Stephen. I'm glad you came. We'll do everything we can to help. Henry stepped in, clasping Stephen on the back. You're in the right place, brother. I've been where you are, and I can tell you it gets better. Stephen's lip trembled as he nodded, his sister squeezing his shoulder. Barron felt a swell of emotion as he watched the interaction. Moments like this reminded him why he'd started the program in the first place. The event was a success. By the end of the day, over 40 veterans had signed up for job interviews, and 15 were approved for transitional housing. Barron and Henry sat together afterward, reviewing the feedback forms. You really think this can go national? Henry asked, his voice filled with curiosity and a touch of disbelief. I don't just think it. I know what Barron said confidently. People are paying attention. We've had calls from companies in New York, Chicago, and even LA, asking how they can get involved. Henry leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a grin. You're something else, kid. The ripple effects of Operation Homeward began to show. News outlets picked up the story, featuring interviews with Barron and Henry. Headlines like Teenager Sparks Veteran Aid Movement and a Trump with a mission-dominated social media, drawing praise and skepticism alike. Barron's father, Donald Trump, finally sat him down to talk about it after a particularly glowing feature aired on a Sunday morning news show. I've got to admit, Barron Donald said, leaning back in his chair, this wasn't what I expected from you. But it's impressive. You've got people talking. Barron smiled faintly, unsure if his father's tone was purely complimentary or tinged with surprise. It's not about the attention, Dad. It's about the impact. Donald studied him for a moment before nodding. Fair enough. If you keep this up, it could become something big. Let me know if you need connections. I've got plenty of friends who'd want to help. Barron hesitated, then nodded. Thanks, Dad. I will. A week later, Barron stood on stage at a local charity gala, invited as a guest speaker to represent Operation Homeward. He looked out at the crowd of polished faces, many of them wealthy donors and influential figures. His palms were sweaty, but he took a deep breath, channeling the determination that had carried him this far. Good evening, he began. When I met Henry Walsh, I wasn't sure what I could do to help. All I knew was that walking away wasn't an option. Since then, I've learned something important. Change doesn't happen all at once. It starts with small actions, one person at a time. And that's what Operation Homeward is about, restoring dignity, one life at a time. The applause was thunderous, but Barron's thoughts were already on the next steps. The event raised over $200,000 for the program, ensuring its expansion into new cities. That night, Barron returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. As he sank into his desk chair, his phone buzzed with a message from Henry. Saw the speech. You killed it, kid. Proud of you. Barron smiled, typing back a quick response. Couldn't have done it without you, Henry. We're just getting started. Success often comes with challenges, and for Barron Trump and Operation Homeward, the pushback began as soon as the program started gaining national attention. Barron had expected skepticism, but he hadn't anticipated how fiercely some would oppose the initiative. It began with a viral op-ed in a major newspaper. The headline blared a Trump family PR stunt or genuine change. The article questioned Barron's motives, hinting that Operation Homeward was nothing more than a calculated move to improve the family's public image. Barron read the article late one night, the harsh words stinging more than he cared to admit. He had poured his heart into this project, and while he knew the criticism wasn't entirely unexpected, it felt deeply unfair. He put his phone down and stared at the ceiling, wondering how to respond. The next morning, Barron met with Mr. Cohen in their modest office space, now bustling with volunteers and staff. Cohen had the op-ed pulled up on his tablet, his expression calm but serious. "You read it, I assume," Cohen said, handing the tablet to Barron. Barron nodded. "I don't care what they think about me, but this could hurt the program. What if donors back out? What if people stop trusting us?" Cohen leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "This kind of scrutiny comes with the territory, especially when your last name is Trump. The best way to counter it is with results. Focus on the work, and let the numbers speak for themselves." Barron nodded, though the knot in his stomach remained. "And what about the people who still won't believe in us?" "You can't please everyone," Barron Cohen said firmly. "But you can prove them wrong." Later that day, Barron visited Henry at the construction site where he worked. Henry was loading lumber onto a truck, his face flushed with effort. When he spotted Barron, he waved and wiped his hands on his jeans. "You're a sight for sore eyes," Kid Henry said with a grin. "What brings you here?" Barron hesitated, then held up a copy of the op-ed. "Have you seen this?" Henry scanned the page, his brow furrowing as he read. "What a load of garbage," he muttered, handing it back. "Why are you letting this get to you?" Barron shrugged, his frustration evident. "It's not just me they're attacking, it's the program. I don't want people like you to get caught in the crossfire." Henry clapped a hand on Barron's shoulder. "Listen to me. What you're doing matters. Don't let a bunch of cynics tell you otherwise. You're making a difference, and that's what counts." Barron smiled faintly. "Thanks, Henry. I needed that." In the weeks that followed, Barron and the Operation Homeward team doubled down on their efforts. They released data showing the program's early success, dozens of veterans employed, housed, and connected to vital resources. They also ramped up outreach, inviting critics to visit the program in person. One such critic, a journalist who had been particularly vocal in her skepticism, accepted the invitation. Barron personally gave her a tour, introducing her to veterans like Stephen, who shared their stories of transformation. By the end of the visit, the journalist's icy demeanor had softened. "I'll admit, I came here expecting to expose a facade," she told Barron. "But it's clear that what you're doing is real. I'll make sure my readers know that." The resulting article, titled "A Teenager's Mission to Restore Dignity," was a turning point. Donations surged, and public support for the program grew. Despite the positive momentum, there were still challenges. Bureaucratic red tape slowed down efforts to secure government partnerships, and a vocal minority of critics continued to question Barron's motives. But through it all, Barron remained steadfast. One evening, as Barron prepared for yet another meeting, his mother walked into his room. She watched him for a moment before speaking. "You've grown so much through this," Melania said softly. "I'm proud of you." Barron looked up, surprised. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." Melania smiled. "Just remember, the people who doubt you don't matter. The people you're helping, that's who matters." The culmination of their efforts came at a televised town hall event, where Barron spoke alongside veterans like Henry and Stephen. The audience listened intently as they shared their stories, the room filled with a sense of hope and purpose. "I'm not here to ask for praise," Barron said in his closing remarks. "I'm here to ask for action. We've proven that change is possible, but we can't do it alone. Together, we can make sure no veteran is left behind." The applause was thunderous, and as Barron stepped off the stage, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face whatever came next. 6 months after Operation Homeward's inception, Barron Trump stood on the steps of a refurbished community center in downtown Washington, D.C. The building, once derelict, was now a bustling hub for veterans. A large sign hung over the entrance: Operation Homeward Headquarters, a place to rebuild. Barron looked out at the growing crowd of veterans, volunteers and supporters gathering for the center's grand opening. The day was sunny, the atmosphere electric with optimism. This was the culmination of months of work, countless meetings, and a vision that had started with one conversation on a city sidewalk. The event began with a series of speeches from sponsors and community leaders. When it was Barron's turn to speak, the crowd erupted into applause. Nervously adjusting the microphone, he glanced at Henry Walsh, who who stood smiling in the front row. The sight gave him courage. "Thank you all for being here today," Barron began. "When I first met Henry, I didn't know what I could do to help. All I knew was that I couldn't ignore the problem. And as I got to know Henry, I realized that his story wasn't unique. Too many veterans, men and women who have sacrificed so much, are left without the resources they need to rebuild their lives." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. This center isn't just a building. It's a symbol of what we can accomplish when we come together. It's proof that small acts of kindness can grow into something much larger. The crowd applauded again, but Barron wasn't finished. "This isn't the end of the journey, it's just the beginning. Our mission is to ensure that no veteran ever feels forgotten or discarded. We still have a long way to go, but together, I know we can make a difference." As he stepped back from the podium, the applause was deafening. Barron felt a swell of pride and relief, knowing that the program had not only survived its critics but thrived. Later, Barron and Henry walked through the center, touring its many features. The building housed job training facilities, temporary housing units, counseling offices, and a communal kitchen. Veterans were already mingling in the common areas, their laughter and conversation filling the air. Henry stopped in front of a mural painted on one of the walls. It depicted a soldier helping another to his feet, their faces determined and hopeful. Beneath the image was the program's tagline, "Restoring dignity, one life at a time." "You've done something incredible here," Kid Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see the day when someone like you would care so much about someone like me." Barron smiled. "It's not just me, Henry. It's everyone who believed in this mission. And it's people like you who prove that second chances are worth fighting for." Henry clapped Barron on the shoulder. "You've given us more than a second chance. You've given us hope." As the day wound down, Barron sat in the center's small office, reviewing plans for future expansions. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Saw the coverage. Proud of you, son." Barron stared at the screen for a moment, a mixture of emotions washing over him. His father wasn't one to express pride easily, and the message carried more weight than he had expected. He quickly typed a response, "Thanks, Dad. It means a lot." Another knock on the door broke his thoughts. Melania stepped in, holding a framed certificate. She placed it on his desk with a smile. "What's this?" Barron asked, picking it up. "It's from the city," Melania said. "A recognition of the impact Operation Homeward has had on the community." Barron studied the certificate, his name written in bold letters at the top. He felt a strange mix of pride and humility. "This isn't just mine," he said quietly. "It belongs to everyone who's helped." Melania smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "True, but it started with you. Never forget that." That evening, Barron returned to Lafayette Park. The streets were quieter now, the hustle of the day replaced by the soft hum of the evening. He found the spot where he'd first met Henry, the same patch of sidewalk that had sparked everything. Sitting on a nearby bench, Barron allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about how much had changed in such a short time, not just for Henry, but for himself. The program had taught him the value of action, the power of using privilege for good, and the importance of seeing people not as problems but as individuals with stories worth hearing. He pulled out his phone and opened the Operation Homeward website. Scrolling through the photos of veterans smiling, working, and thriving, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Barron Trump had always lived in the shadow of his family's name, but now he was carving out a legacy of his own, a legacy built not on power or wealth, but on compassion and purpose. As he stood to leave, he glanced back at the empty sidewalk one last time. It was just a piece of pavement to most people, but to him, it was the place where everything began. With a final nod of gratitude, he walked away, ready to take on whatever came next.